Owen had been in many uncomfortable diplomatic situations before, but none of them involved being used as a royal pillow. The throne room of Thalrin's capital palace was built to intimidate visitors. Towering white pillars curved upward like frozen lightning, meeting a ceiling of translucent crystal panels through which the pale glow of orbiting moons filtered into the chamber. Holographic constellations drifted slowly above the council floor, mapping trade routes and military corridors across half the known galaxy. It was meant to remind every visitor that the Thalrin monarchy ruled not merely a planet, but an empire of systems. Owen had prepared carefully for this visit. He had rehearsed greetings in 3 dialects of the Thalrin language, memorized the correct angle for diplomatic bows, and studied a 32-page briefing titled "Things That Might Accidentally Offend an Alien Queen." None of the briefings mentioned anything about babysitting. He sat quietly near the outer ring of the throne chamber, waiting while Queen Lissa's council debated something involving orbital grain platforms. The discussion had been going on for so long that Owen had begun categorizing the speakers in his mind. Tall advisor with the dramatic voice, nervous advisor who kept dropping his data tablet, extremely serious advisor who had been explaining agricultural gravity stabilizers for what felt like 3 centuries. Owen kept a polite diplomatic expression on his face while privately wondering if humans had invented coffee quickly enough to survive meetings like this. Then the small door beside the throne opened. A young girl stepped into the chamber. She looked almost human, pale skin, silver hair tied loosely behind her head, wide, curious eyes. The only obvious difference was the long, elegant ears that curved slightly backward along her head. Princess Vera. The court fell silent immediately, though the princess didn't seem to notice. She walked into the room with the unhurried confidence of someone who had grown up in a palace and therefore assumed every room belonged to her. Her gaze drifted across the chamber until it stopped on Owen. She stared. Owen stared back. After several seconds, she walked directly toward him. Owen straightened slightly, trying to remember if diplomatic protocol included being approached by unscheduled royalty under the age of 10. The princess stopped directly in front of him. "You're the human," she said. It was not a question. Owen nodded. "That's correct." She tilted her head, studying him with the intense curiosity normally reserved for newly discovered species or unusual insects. Then without warning, she climbed onto his lap. Owen froze. Not the polite diplomatic freeze, the complete nervous system shutdown freeze of a man who had suddenly become aware that royal guards were staring at him. The princess shifted slightly, curled against him, and within seconds her breathing slowed. She had fallen asleep. The silence that followed was so absolute Owen could hear the faint hum of the palace energy grid beneath the floor. Across the chamber, Queen Lissa slowly lowered the tablet she had been reading. Every council member turned toward Owen. The guards exchanged uncertain looks. One of them whispered something quietly into his wrist communicator. Owen sat very still. He had no idea what the correct diplomatic response to this situation was. He considered several options. Option 1, gently move the princess to a nearby chair. Option 2, politely stand up and return the child to her mother. Option 3, remain completely motionless and hope no one panics. He glanced down. The princess had wrapped one small hand into the fabric of his coat, gripping it like an anchor. She looked very peaceful. He sighed quietly. Option 3 it was. Minutes passed. The council members began whispering among themselves. One advisor leaned toward another and murmured something that sounded suspiciously like, "Is the human kidnapping the princess?" Owen cleared his throat. "I assure you," he said quietly, "this kidnapping appears to be extremely voluntary." A few members of the court looked confused. Others looked as though they were trying not to laugh. Queen Lissa watched the entire scene from her throne. Her expression was difficult to read. Eventually, one of the royal guards approached cautiously. He was tall even by Thalrin standards, armored in polished silver plates that reflected the glow of the chamber lights. He leaned slightly toward Owen. "Human," the guard whispered carefully. "Yes? Are you aware you are holding the royal heir?" Owen glanced down at the sleeping princess. "Yes." The guard hesitated. "And you are comfortable with this responsibility?" Owen thought about his completely numb legs. "I wouldn't say comfortable, he admitted. The guard blinked. Then why remain? Owen shifted his gaze back to the princess. Her breathing was steady, calm. For the first time since entering the palace, the room felt strangely peaceful. He shrugged slightly. Well, he said quietly, she seems to be having a good nap. The guard straightened slowly, clearly unsure how to report that to anyone. Across the chamber, Queen Lissa continued watching the human who had just chosen to remain trapped under a sleeping princess rather than risk waking her. And for the first time that day, the queen leaned back in her throne with quiet curiosity. The silence inside the throne chamber gradually dissolved into the quiet murmur of a court that had absolutely no protocol for this situation. Princess Vera remained asleep, her head resting lightly against Owen's chest. One of her long silver strands of hair had drifted across his sleeve, and every few seconds one of her elegant ears twitched faintly, like a dreaming animal listening to distant sounds. Owen had now been sitting in exactly the same position for 20 minutes. He had learned several important things in that time. First, alien princesses were surprisingly heavy. Second, royal guards stared at people in a way that made even breathing feel suspicious. Third, if he moved even slightly, Vera tightened her grip on his coat, so he remained completely still. Across the chamber, the council meeting attempted to continue, though it now resembled a group of scholars trying to debate philosophy inside a library where someone was sleeping 3 meters away. Hyperspace grain transport corridors remain inefficient, one advisor whispered loudly. Another advisor leaned closer. Could you whisper more quietly? That was whispering. Queen Lissa watched the discussion with the calm patience of someone who ruled several star systems and therefore had long ago accepted that reality rarely behaves sensibly. Her gaze kept returning to Owen. He had not moved. He had not complained. He had not tried to push the princess away. In fact, he looked like someone trying very hard not to breathe too loudly. The queen leaned slightly toward her chief advisor. How long has she been asleep? The advisor quietly checked a small holographic chronometer floating above his wrist. 23 minutes, Your Majesty. The queen's brow furrowed slightly. Impossible. The advisor shook his head slowly. No night terrors, no sudden waking. Queen Lissa looked toward her daughter again. For 3 weeks, Vera had barely slept longer than 10 minutes at a time. The palace physicians had blamed neurological after effects from a hyperspace disturbance their ship encountered during a recent diplomatic journey. Hyperspace occasionally did strange things to young minds. Adults usually adapted. Children sometimes didn't. Yet now Vera slept peacefully on the lap of a human she had met less than 5 minutes before. The queen found that difficult to explain. Meanwhile, Owen was conducting extremely serious negotiations with his legs. If you remain calm, he thought, blood circulation will return eventually. His legs responded by becoming even more numb. One of the royal guards approached again, moving with careful steps that made almost no sound on the polished floor. The guard leaned slightly toward him. Human Owen. Yes. You have now been seated for 27 minutes. Owen nodded. I'm aware. The guard studied him with quiet confusion. You may request assistance. Owen considered that. Then he glanced down. Vera had shifted slightly, curling closer to him. Her hand was still clutching his coat. He lowered his voice. She seems comfortable. The guard hesitated. Yes. So I think I'll just stay here. The guard blinked slowly. This was not a standard diplomatic strategy. At the far side of the chamber, 2 younger advisors were whispering. Should we move her? You move her. I am not waking the princess. What if the queen orders it? Then I will pretend I fainted. Owen overheard this and had to fight very hard not to laugh. Unfortunately, laughing might wake the princess, and waking the princess might start an international incident. Diplomacy was complicated. The council attempted to resume its discussion. A large holographic projection appeared above the central table, showing an agricultural satellite network orbiting one of the outer colonies. An advisor began explaining orbital crop stabilization fields. He spoke for nearly 10 minutes. Owen learned absolutely nothing about orbital farming because he was busy discovering that his right leg had now entirely ceased to exist. He leaned slightly toward the guard again. I have a question. Yes, human. If my leg falls off, is that considered disrespectful to the monarchy? The guard looked alarmed. Your leg will not fall off. That's reassuring? Probably. Owen sighed quietly. Across the chamber, Queen Lissa had heard the exchange. Against her better judgment, she felt the corner of her mouth lift slightly. Eventually she stood. The movement instantly silenced the chamber. The queen descended from the throne platform and walked slowly toward the center of the room. Her long, ceremonial robes shimmered with threads of living light that shifted color with each step. She stopped in front of Owen. Up close, her presence was even more imposing. The queen carried the quiet authority of someone who had commanded fleets and negotiated treaties between entire civilizations. Yet her eyes were focused on something much smaller. Her daughter. She has not slept peacefully in many nights, Lissa said quietly. Owen looked down at Vera. She looks pretty determined to finish this one. The queen studied him. You could wake her. Owen shook his head slightly. That feels like a terrible idea. Why? Owen shrugged carefully. Because she looks like someone who really needed this. The queen remained silent for a moment. Then she asked a strange question. Human Owen, are you uncomfortable? He answered honestly. Extremely. The queen raised an eyebrow. Then why do you remain? Owen glanced around the enormous throne chamber, at the royal guards, the advisors, the alien queen standing in front of him. Then he looked back at the sleeping child. Well, he said softly, someone has to be the chair. For a moment, the queen simply stared at him. Then very quietly, Queen Lissa laughed. The quiet laugh from Queen Lissa spread through the throne chamber, like a small shock wave. No one in the court had expected it. Several advisors looked up immediately, startled, as if the laws of physics had just been rewritten. One elderly council member nearly dropped his glowing data slate. The royal guards shifted uncomfortably, unsure whether laughing during a diplomatic incident was allowed. Owen looked up at the queen. Was that a good laugh? He asked carefully. Queen Lissa composed herself, though the faint smile remained on her face. Human Owen, I have ruled 3 star systems for 17 years, she said. In that time, I have mediated wars, ended trade collapses, and negotiated peace between civilizations that previously attempted to vaporize each other. She gestured slightly toward the sleeping princess. And yet this situation may be the most unusual diplomatic challenge I have faced. Owen nodded sympathetically. I specialize in unusual. Vera shifted slightly in her sleep, pressing her face more comfortably against his chest. Every guard in the room instinctively tensed. Owen froze again. The princess murmured something softly in her language, something that sounded like the quiet, half-formed sounds children made when dreaming. One of her long ears twitched gently before she settled again. The room slowly relaxed. Queen Lissa watched her daughter closely. She has not slept like this since the hyperspace storm, the queen said quietly. Several council members lowered their heads respectfully. Hyperspace storms were rare phenomena, chaotic distortions within faster-than-light travel corridors. Most ships avoided them entirely, but sometimes navigation systems failed, and vessels were forced to ride the storm currents for survival. The Thalran royal ship had encountered one during their return from a diplomatic summit months ago. Everyone aboard had survived, but Vera had not been the same since. Sleep had become an enemy. Night after night, she woke screaming from dreams no physician could interpret. Until today. Until now. Queen Lissa folded her arms slowly as she observed the strange human diplomat holding her sleeping daughter, like an awkward statue. You are remarkably calm, human Owen. Owen looked down at Vera, then back at the queen. On the outside. And on the inside? My legs are negotiating surrender. A few nearby advisors snorted quietly before quickly pretending they hadn't. One of the palace engineers whispered to another council member, Should we bring him a support chair? The other advisor frowned. If we move him, the princess may wake. Then perhaps a support human. That seems complicated. Meanwhile, Owen had begun mentally composing a message to future diplomats. Important note, alien princesses weigh approximately 1 diplomatic incident. Across the chamber, a floating service drone quietly drifted into the room carrying a tray of small glass containers filled with glowing blue liquid. Tea. The drone paused near Owen and emitted a soft chime. Queen Lissa looked toward it. The drone's polite mechanical voice spoke. Refreshment protocol activated. Owen stared at the hovering tray. You have got to be kidding. One of the advisors whispered. It is offering tea. I cannot reach the tea. You could lean forward. I absolutely cannot lean forward. The drone waited patiently. Princess Vera tightened her grip on his coat slightly, as if sensing the possibility of movement. Owen sighed. I would love the tea, he said quietly, but my arms are currently assigned to Princess Stabilization. The drone processed this information. Then it did something unexpected. One of its small, articulated arms lifted a glass of tea and carefully raised it toward Owen's mouth. The entire throne chamber watched. Owen stared at the hovering drink. Queen Lissa raised an eyebrow. Well, she said calmly, it seems the palace has chosen to assist you. Owen looked at the drone again. This feels like the beginning of a very embarrassing historical painting. The drone remained perfectly steady. Finally, Owen leaned forward slightly and took a careful sip. The tea was warm and faintly sweet, with a strange, sparkling aftertaste that made his tongue feel like it had briefly entered another dimension. He blinked. That's, excellent tea. The drone lowered the glass and returned it to the tray. Several advisors quietly applauded. The royal guard beside Owen whispered, You have now been seated for 52 minutes. Owen nodded. Good to know. You remain remarkably patient. I work in diplomacy. That explains much. Across the chamber, Queen Lissa slowly sat back down on the lower step of the throne platform, rather than returning fully to her throne. Her attention remained fixed on the human. It would have been easy for him to demand assistance. Easy to wake the princess. Easy to stand up and return the responsibility to the palace. Instead, he simply endured the discomfort, for the sake of a sleeping child. She watched Vera breathe slowly, peacefully. Then she spoke quietly to the court physician standing beside her. When was the last time she slept this long? The physician checked a small floating medical display. 47 days ago, Your Majesty. The Queen's expression softened. Meanwhile, Owen attempted to stretch one toe inside his boot. Nothing happened. My foot is gone, he whispered to the guard. It is still there. I can't feel it. That is temporary. I hope so. Several advisors nearby were now openly smiling. The tension that had filled the chamber earlier had begun to dissolve into something far stranger. Quiet amusement, gentle curiosity, and in the center of it all sat a human diplomat, slowly losing circulation in his legs while serving as the most important chair in the Thalren Empire. Across the chamber, Queen Lissa watched him and thought something she had not expected to think that day. Perhaps her daughter had chosen wisely. Time in the throne chamber began to stretch into something strange and almost unreal. At first it had been a diplomatic meeting, then it had become a silent crisis. Now, several hours later, it had quietly evolved into the most unusual social gathering the Thalren court had experienced in decades. Owen had stopped feeling his legs entirely. This was both concerning and, oddly enough, convenient. If you could not feel your legs, you could not complain about them. Princess Vera remained asleep, breathing softly against his chest. Occasionally she shifted slightly, adjusting her position like a small creature seeking warmth. Each movement sent a ripple of nervous tension through the surrounding guards, but she never woke. The palace lights slowly adjusted to the evening cycle. The crystalline ceiling dimmed as the artificial daylight of the chamber softened into the deep violet hues of Thalren's night spectrum. One of the advisors looked up at the ceiling and whispered to another, We have been here for 4 hours. The other advisor frowned. I believe this is now technically a diplomatic vigil. Owen overheard them. If anyone lights candles, he muttered quietly, I'm leaving. The nearby guard coughed, attempting to hide a laugh. Across the chamber, the massive holographic star map that had once dominated the council meeting still hovered above the central table. Slowly rotating constellations projected faint light across the room, stars drifting lazily through the air like glowing dust. One of the palace engineers had quietly repurposed the projection into something less distracting. Instead of trade routes and war corridors, the hologram now displayed calm nebula clouds and slowly orbiting planets. Apparently, the court had decided the princess's nap required good atmosphere. Queen Lissa had noticed this as well. She sat on the lower steps of the throne platform now, watching the scene with thoughtful calm. At some point, the council meeting had officially stopped. No one had formally announced it. The advisors had simply stopped talking. Now they spoke quietly in small groups, occasionally glancing toward Owen and the sleeping princess, as if observing a rare scientific experiment. "How long do humans remain still?" one scholar whispered. Another consulted a datapad. "There is no official record." Meanwhile, Owen was performing deep internal negotiations with his spine. He leaned slightly toward the guard again. "I believe I have entered a new stage of existence." The guard tilted his head. "What stage?" "Furniture." The guard considered this. "That is a respected role in royal architecture." "I'm honored." A small, hovering maintenance drone drifted past them, scanning the room with soft pulses of blue light. When it reached Owen, it paused briefly, analyzing him with curious beeps. Owen glanced at it. "If you're here to install cushions, please proceed." The drone rotated once and continued on its path. Across the chamber, two royal physicians were quietly reviewing Vera's neural readings through a floating medical display. One of them looked astonished. "These brainwave patterns are stable." The other nodded. "Deep sleep. Natural sleep." They both looked toward Owen. "On a human." One of the advisors leaned over. "Should we record this for medical research?" The physician whispered back. "Perhaps we should record the human." Meanwhile, Queen Lissa slowly stood and walked across the chamber again. The court parted respectfully as she approached. She stopped a few steps away from Owen and observed the scene once more. Vera had curled slightly closer, her long ear resting against Owen's shoulder. One of her hands still held his coat, though her grip had relaxed. Queen Lissa spoke quietly. "You have now been sitting there for 5 hours." Owen blinked. "That explains a lot." "You have not complained." "I have complained internally." The Queen studied him carefully. "You realize you could have woken her." Owen nodded. "Probably. Yet you did not." Owen shrugged slightly. "She looked like she needed the sleep." The Queen glanced down at her daughter again. For weeks, Vera had woken screaming in the middle of the night, terrified by dreams she could never fully describe. Yet now her face looked peaceful. The Queen felt something inside her chest loosen slightly. Behind her, one of the palace guards quietly whispered to another. "If he stands up now, he may collapse." The other guard whispered back. "We should prepare a stretcher." Owen heard that. "I can hear you." "Apologies, human." "Please do prepare the stretcher." The guard nodded seriously. "It will be a royal stretcher." "Well, that makes it better." A few members of the court laughed openly now. The tension had almost completely dissolved. What remained was a quiet, surreal warmth spreading through the chamber. Eventually, Owen shifted his gaze back toward Queen Lissa. "Your Majesty?" "Yes?" "If she sleeps much longer, I may require diplomatic reinforcements." The Queen raised an eyebrow. "Reinforcements?" "Yes." "What kind?" Owen thought for a moment. "Possibly another human leg." Queen Lissa laughed again, and as the sound echoed gently through the throne chamber, Princess Vera slept peacefully in the safest place she had found in weeks. The palace night cycle deepened across the throne chamber. The crystalline ceiling slowly shifted from violet into a soft indigo glow, simulating the quiet darkness of Thalrin's sky. Artificial stars shimmered faintly between the ceiling panels, part of the palace's atmospheric lighting system designed to keep visitors calm during long council sessions. Ironically, no council session in the history of the Thalrin Empire had ever lasted this long for the purpose of protecting a nap. Owen had now reached a state beyond discomfort. His legs had progressed through numbness, tingling, mild existential dread, and finally something resembling philosophical acceptance. He was no longer sure they were attached to him. Princess Vera remained peacefully asleep, her breathing slow and steady. One of her small hands had slipped from his coat and now rested lightly against his arm, fingers curled as if holding on to a dream. The palace court had gradually reorganized itself around the strange moment. Some advisors had left to attend other duties. Others had returned with quiet curiosity, bringing data tablets and small floating chairs to observe the scene, like scholars attending a rare cosmic event. Near the far wall, two historians were quietly arguing. "This must be documented." "It already is." "You're recording?" "Of course I'm recording." Meanwhile, a palace engineer had placed a small sensor drone nearby to monitor Vera's neural activity. The readings were astonishing. Perfectly calm. No fear responses. No sudden disturbances. The physician studying the display whispered to Queen Lissa, "Your Majesty, the princess has entered a full restorative sleep cycle." The queen looked down at her daughter, disbelief slowly giving way to quiet relief. Across the chamber, Owen attempted to move his toes again. Nothing happened. He leaned toward the nearby guard. "Status update." The guard looked at him. "Yes? My feet have officially become historical artifacts. They remain attached. Are you certain? I visually confirmed them 2 minutes ago." "That's comforting." The guard studied him curiously. "You remain remarkably patient for a human." Owen shrugged slightly. "I grew up with two younger siblings." "That explains much." A small service drone drifted into the chamber again, carrying another tray of glowing blue tea. This time it also carried something else. A cushion. The drone hovered uncertainly beside Owen. Its soft mechanical voice spoke. "Comfort assistance protocol." Owen looked at the cushion. Then he looked at the princess sleeping in his lap. Then back at the drone. "You see the problem." The drone processed this information. After several seconds, it slowly rotated and placed the cushion behind Owen's back instead. The improvement was immediate. Owen sighed. "That may be the greatest technological advancement in galactic history?" The guard nodded approvingly. The Thalran Empire prides itself on innovation. Across the chamber, Queen Lissa watched the interaction. Something about the scene felt strangely peaceful. For weeks, the palace had been filled with tension over Vera's condition. Every night, the royal physicians prepared calming chambers and neural stabilizers in anticipation of another wave of night terrors. But tonight, the princess simply slept. On a human. Queen Lissa approached again, her steps quiet against the polished floor. She stopped beside Owen and looked down. "Human Owen." "Yes, Your Majesty." "You have now remained here for 6 hours." Owen blinked. "That seems excessive. You could still stand." He considered that carefully. Then he looked down at Vera. She had shifted slightly again, curling closer, her silver hair spilling across his sleeve. Owen sighed. "That feels like a terrible idea." Queen Lissa studied him. "You care more about her sleep than your own comfort." Owen shrugged. "Kids deserve sleep." The queen folded her arms thoughtfully. "You speak as though you have experience. I once babysat my sister's twin boys during a solar eclipse. And they attempted to dismantle my apartment." The queen raised an eyebrow. "Impressive." "They were 3. For the first time that evening, one of the younger advisors nearby laughed loudly before quickly covering his mouth. Even several of the guards were smiling now. The atmosphere of the throne room had completely changed. What had begun as an awkward diplomatic accident had slowly become something almost warm. A quiet moment shared by an entire court. Then suddenly Vera stirred. Her small fingers moved slightly against Owen's sleeve. The entire chamber froze again. Owen stopped breathing. One guard instinctively took half a step forward. The physicians leaned toward their monitoring displays. Princess Vera shifted slightly in her sleep, murmuring softly in the Thalran language. Then she settled again, still asleep. A collective exhale spread through the chamber. Owen whispered carefully to the guard. "If she wakes suddenly, I may panic. You are doing well so far. I have lost circulation in half my body." Still impressive. Across the chamber, Queen Lissa watched them. And for the first time since the hyperspace storm that had frightened her daughter so deeply, she allowed herself to believe something hopeful. Perhaps the universe sometimes solved problems in the strangest ways, even if those solutions involved a very patient human acting as royal furniture. The quiet calm inside the throne chamber had become so complete that even the palace system seemed to cooperate. The overhead star projection slowly rotated in soft silence. Nebula clouds drifted gently across the ceiling like enormous cosmic dreams. The humming energy grid beneath the palace floor pulsed at a steady rhythm that almost matched the slow breathing of the sleeping princess. For the first time in weeks, the palace felt peaceful. Owen, however, was having a completely different experience. He was now absolutely certain his legs had permanently separated from the rest of his existence. He leaned slightly toward the guard beside him. "I believe I have transcended my physical body." The guard glanced down. You appear physically present. Only from the waist up. The guard studied his expression. Your humor suggests acceptable survival levels. That is the diplomatic strategy. Princess Vera remained asleep, her head resting against Owen's chest as though she had always belonged there. Occasionally, one of her long ears twitched faintly, reacting to sounds only children seemed able to hear while dreaming. Nearby, the palace medical drone quietly scanned her neural readings again. The physician studying the holographic display looked increasingly amazed. Her mind is completely calm. Another physician leaned closer. Even the hyperspace trauma patterns have faded. How is that possible? The first physician slowly turned his head toward Owen. I believe the answer is sitting in the middle of the room. Across the chamber, several advisors had begun whispering theories. Perhaps humans emit calming pheromones, or their gravitational field stabilizes young minds. One scientist whispered thoughtfully, it could be something about mammalian warmth. The advisor beside him nodded. Or perhaps the princess simply likes him. The scientist looked offended. That explanation lacks scientific elegance. Meanwhile, Owen had discovered a new problem. His foot had returned. Unfortunately, it had returned with the sensation of 10,000 microscopic needles. He inhaled sharply. The guard noticed immediately. Circulation? Circulation. That is good. It feels extremely bad. You are surviving. I question that conclusion. Across the chamber, Queen Lissa continued observing the scene with quiet fascination. The entire throne room had transformed around this single unexpected moment. The council meeting had dissolved hours ago, yet no one wished to leave. Instead, the court had settled into a gentle watchfulness. Even the palace artificial intelligence had reduced environmental noise levels to maintain the calm atmosphere. Finally, the queen stood again and walked slowly across the chamber. Her long ceremonial cloak shimmered faintly as its living fibers reacted to the chamber lighting. She stopped beside Owen and looked down at her daughter. Vera stirred slightly. The entire room tensed, but the princess only shifted closer, pressing her cheek more comfortably against Owen's chest. Queen Lissa exhaled quietly. She has not slept this long since before the hyperspace storm, the queen said softly. Owen nodded. She's doing great. The queen studied him carefully. You realize you have now served as royal furniture for 7 hours. Owen blinked slowly. That seems excessive even for diplomacy. You have shown remarkable patience. I would describe it as strategic immobility. Explain. If I move, everything becomes worse. The queen considered this. That is surprisingly wise. One of the nearby advisors whispered to another, we should consider adding this tactic to future diplomatic training. The other advisor nodded thoughtfully. Human stillness strategy. Meanwhile, a palace service drone quietly approached again. This time it carried something new, a small blanket. The drone hovered uncertainly beside Owen, clearly unsure how to deploy the item without disturbing the princess. Owen whispered carefully, if you drop that on her face, we are all in trouble. The drone paused. Then with astonishing precision, it gently unfolded the blanket and placed it across Vera's shoulders. The princess sighed softly in her sleep. The entire chamber relaxed again. Owen looked at the drone. That was impressive. The guard beside him nodded. Our drones attend advanced etiquette training. I believe they are more qualified than most diplomats. Across the chamber, a group of younger court members quietly laughed. Queen Lissa watched Owen for another long moment. Then she asked a quieter question. Human Owen, did you know my daughter before today? No. Have you spoken to her before this moment? She asked if I was the human. And then? And then she climbed into my lap. The queen folded her arms. That was her entire decision process. Yes. The queen looked down at Vera again. The princess's face was completely relaxed, free from the shadows of fear that had haunted her for weeks. Queen Lissa spoke quietly. Children of Thalrin possess strong intuition. Owen nodded. Human kids do too. The queen looked at him again. You believe she trusted you immediately. I think she decided I was safe. And you? I decided not to wake her. For several seconds, the queen said nothing. Then she turned slightly toward the court physician. How long has she slept now? The physician checked his display. 7 hours and 42 minutes, Your Majesty. A quiet murmur passed through the room. That had not happened in nearly 2 months. Owen leaned slightly toward the guard again. Update. Yes? My left leg is returning from the void. That is progress. I believe I will need rehabilitation. The guard nodded. The palace medical wing is excellent. Wonderful. Across the chamber, the star projection slowly shifted again, revealing a bright spiral galaxy rotating silently above them. And beneath that drifting galaxy, Princess Vera finally began to stir. Princess Vera stirred slowly, as though waking from a very long and very comfortable dream. The first sign was a small movement of her fingers against Owen's sleeve. Then one of her long silver ears twitched twice, reacting to the soft hum of the palace energy systems. The throne chamber froze. Every advisor, guard, physician, and drone suddenly became very interested in being perfectly silent. Owen noticed immediately. "Uh-oh," he whispered. The guard beside him leaned closer. "Remain calm. I have been calm for 8 hours. You have done very well. I am about to panic." Vera shifted again, blinking slowly as her eyes opened. For several seconds she stared forward, still half asleep. Her gaze drifted lazily across the glowing ceiling, where the artificial stars slowly rotated above the chamber. Then she looked up. She noticed Owen. Her expression showed no surprise at all. "Oh," she said softly. Owen looked down at her. "Hello." The princess stretched slightly, rubbing one eye with the back of her hand. "How long did I sleep?" Owen glanced toward the guard. The guard checked a small chronometer. 8 hours and 11 minutes. Owen looked back at her. "Apparently you set a new palace record." Vera blinked sleepily. "That was a good nap." Across the chamber, a wave of quiet relief moved through the court. The physicians checked their displays again, confirming what they were seeing. Stable neural readings, no fear spikes, no hyperspace trauma patterns. The princess simply looked rested. Queen Lissa approached slowly, her expression calm, but her eyes bright with quiet emotion. "Vera," she said gently. The princess turned her head. "Hello, mother. You slept for a long time." "Yes." "Did you have nightmares?" Vera shook her head. "No." The chamber fell silent again. Queen Lissa lowered herself slightly so she was closer to her daughter. "How do you feel?" The princess thought about it carefully. "Better." The queen exhaled slowly. Owen, meanwhile, attempted to shift his legs. This was a mistake. Every nerve in his body immediately protested. He inhaled sharply. "Oh no!" The guard looked concerned. "Circulation returning?" "It is returning aggressively." The princess looked at him. "Why are you making that face?" "My legs are waking up." "Are they angry?" "Extremely." Several advisors laughed quietly. Vera sat up slightly in his lap, looking around the enormous throne chamber. Only now did she seem to realize how many people were staring at her. "Why is everyone here?" One of the younger advisors whispered. "Because of you." The princess looked confused. "I only took a nap." Owen nodded. "A very influential nap." Queen Lissa studied her daughter carefully. "You chose to sleep here," she said softly. Vera nodded. "Yes." "Why?" The princess looked up at Owen again. Her answer was simple. He felt safe. The quiet words echoed gently through the chamber. The royal court fell completely silent. Queen Lissa looked at Owen. The human diplomat suddenly felt far more nervous than he had during the entire 8-hour sitting experience. "I didn't do anything," he said. The queen shook her head slightly. "You did exactly what was needed." Vera climbed carefully down from his lap. The moment she released him, Owen attempted to stand. This was a terrible decision. His legs collapsed instantly. 2 guards caught him before he reached the floor. "I regret everything," Owen groaned. The chamber erupted in laughter. Even Queen Lissa laughed openly now. The guards carefully helped Owen back into a nearby chair, while the palace medical drone hurried forward to scan his legs. "Temporary nerve compression," the drone announced calmly. Owen nodded weakly. "That sounds official." Princess Vera stood beside him, studying him curiously. "You stayed still the whole time?" "Yes." "Why?" Owen shrugged. "You looked like you needed the sleep." The princess considered this. Then she smiled. Queen Lissa watched the moment carefully. For weeks, the palace had searched for complicated medical explanations and advanced technological solutions. Yet the answer had arrived in the form of a patient human who simply chose kindness. The queen stepped forward. Human Owen. Yes, your majesty. You came here as a visiting diplomat. That was the plan. But today you have done something far more valuable. Owen raised an eyebrow. I served as furniture. The court laughed again. Queen Lissa shook her head. You reminded an entire palace of something simple. What's that? That sometimes the solution to fear is not technology, but trust. She looked down at her daughter. And patience. Vera gently tugged Owen's sleeve. Will you stay in the palace? Owen looked toward the queen. Queen Lissa met his gaze calmly. You would be welcome here. Owen considered the offer. He looked at Vera, who was now fully awake and smiling. Then he looked at the enormous throne chamber that had spent 8 hours watching a child sleep. He sighed. Well, he said, next time I'm bringing a cushion. The room filled with warm laughter, and for the first time since the hyperspace storm had frightened the young princess, the palace of Thalrin felt peaceful again.